Hello, I'm Mr. Harper, and we are starting a brand new unit, skeletal system. So we need to dive right in. So skeletal system, you know, are your bones. But there are other things too. Your joints, which are where two bones meet. Cartilage that are in some joints. Tendons that connect muscles to bones in some joints. And ligaments that connect bones to bones in some joints. So let's take a look at each of these areas. First off, we want to talk about functions. Why do you need a skeletal system? What's its purpose? Well, there are numerous functions here. First off, your skeletal system supports your body. Without it, you would not be able to stand. Your bones are rigid and they're hard, and they give your body structure and support. It's like the frame of a house. Without that frame, the house wouldn't stand, neither can your body. Your bones also protect internal organs. Not all internal organs are protected by bones, but some are. For example, your brain is totally encased and enclosed in bone. Your skull, your cranium, totally protects your brain. Your heart and your lungs are protected by the rib cage. Your spinal cord is protected by a bony set of multiple bones called the vertebral column. Your skeleton helps you to move. There are muscles called skeletal muscles. They're called skeletal muscles because guess what? They attach to the skeleton, and the skeleton provides a hard, rigid point for the muscles to pull against, because muscles pull. We'll talk about that when we get to the muscular chapter. And without those bones, you would not be able to move. Your skeletal system stores mineral reserves. Calcium, magnesium gets stored in your bones, and then when your body needs it, those minerals are taken out of the bones, used in your body, and then they're put back as fast as they're taken out. And there's also some fat that is stored in your bone marrow in your bones. And last thing, it is a location for blood to be made. In the bone marrow, inside of bones, red blood cells are made. So that's where that happens. So those are the 5 functions of the skeletal system. The physiology, what it does. Now, in your body, let's talk a little bit about an anatomy side of things. In your body, you have, human body, adults, have 206 bones. Those bones can be separated into 2 major parts. First, the axial skeleton consists of the ribs, the rib cage, I should say, the sternum, the vertebral column, and the skull, or the cranium. And then the other part is called the appendicular skeleton, bones of the arms and legs, bones of the shoulders, and bones of the pelvis, or the hips, are called the appendicular skeleton. Another way of looking at it is this. This axial skeleton is in the green, and here's your cranium, or your skull, your vertebral column, right here, your sternum here in the middle, and the rib cage. The other area, this yellowish color, is the appendicular skeleton, bones of the shoulders, the clavicle, and the scapula, and then the bones of the arm and hands, and the bones of the pelvic girdle, here the pelvis, and the bones of the legs and the feet. Those are all considered part of what is called the appendicular skeleton. Now, how can we classify bones? We've divided them into 2 major categories. How can we classify the bones in those categories? Well, bones can be called long bones. By definition, a long bone is any bone in your body that is longer than it is wide. So, the bones of your arms, the bones of your fingers and your hands are long bones. Bones of your legs and of your feet are long bones. The bones of your rib cage are long bones, as is here, this clavicle, the collarbone. Those are all long bones. Short bones are just what they sound like. They're not long, they're short. They're mostly cube kind of shaped, and those are found in your wrists, in your ankles, and your kneecap, your patella. Flat bones are just what they sound like. They are wide and broad and flat. And those bones are found in your cranium and also your sternum. And then there are the irregularly shaped bones. Don't have any certain shape. That is your pelvis, and your vertebral column. So those are the categories that we can classify bones into. Now, let's look at the gross anatomy of bone. A gross anatomy means the large things, the things that we can see with the naked eye. So we've got here a long bone, longer than it is wide. The long bone has some characteristics about it that we want to notice. First off, there's this part here in the middle that is narrower. It is called the diaphysis. The piece on the end that is bigger, top and bottom, is called the epiphysis. The shaft has mostly what is called compact bone. Compact bone is a dense, solid bone. It's dense, everything is pushed in really, really close together. And in the middle of that compact bone there is a hollow space called the medullary cavity, and it is usually filled with bone marrow, and it's usually called yellow bone marrow because guess what, it looks yellow, and it is a location of fat storage. This bone marrow does not store, does not make blood, it stores fat instead. Now we've cut inside of this part of the bone so we can see totally inside, and you notice that in the end of this bone, in the epiphysis, this bone has little holes in it. It's called spongy bone. It's not solid and dense the way that compact bone is. It's still, I shouldn't say it's not solid, but it is solid, it's just not as dense. It's called spongy bone because it looks like a sponge with holes in it, not because it's soft. It's just as hard as compact bone. And the nice thing about it is it's lighter, so it can add strength and rigidity without adding a whole lot of mass. And there's also compact bone here on the outside of the epiphysis, but spongy bone on the inside. And in this spongy bone, in the holes, this is where bone marrow is found. This bone marrow is not yellow like in the medullary cavity, it is red. And this is the site of where blood is made, in those holes of the spongy bone. Let's continue to talk about a little bit of gross anatomy. On the outside covering of the bone, on the epiphysis and the diaphysis, there is a covering called a periosteum. It's around the very outside of the bone. It covers the bone. Blood vessels run through it. Here's the periosteum being pulled away so you can see it. This periosteum is living tissue. Of course, bone is too, but when you die, this periosteum, it rots, it goes away. If you find a skeleton of a deer or something laying in the woods, or a raccoon, that skeleton, the bones that you see, the periosteum is no longer there. It is rotted, and just the bone tissue is left below that. There are arteries and veins in the periosteum that supply the bone with nutrients, with food, with oxygen, because bone is living tissue. Continuing on the end of long bones, at joints that move, there is a covering over the top. You can see here kind of in blue, and here this whitish blue look. This is called articular cartilage. It's called articular cartilage because these are bones that articulate or move. As the bones move, one bone against the other, they need a very slippery substance between them that will let them move easily without friction. So that's what this cartilage does. It's very, very, very slippery. It decreases friction at a joint. If there's friction, that results in pain. So the cartilage's job is to reduce friction, and it's on the ends of bones that move, and in this case it's long bone, covering the outside of the epiphysis. Now, medullary cavity, we talked about that a little bit earlier, is a cavity found in the diaphysis, the shaft of the bone. It contains yellow marrow in adults, and in infants it contains red marrow, because the bones aren't totally formed in the infant yet. But as you get older, that converts to purely being for yellow bone marrow for fat storage in adults. Moving on, we talked about the gross anatomy. Now let's look quickly at the microscopic anatomy of a bone. As we cut into a bone, here's the periosteum, the covering of the bone. We're taking a look at this little tiny section. We're blowing it up, looking inside of it. You see compact bone here, and then on the inside of that you even see some spongy bone. And what you see are that bones are laid out in circular fashion. Each one of these circular pieces is called an osteon, or is sometimes called a Haversian system also. In the middle of that osteon is a canal. Here you see them. Blood vessels and nerves run through these canals, and bone grows in circles around those canals because those canals are what supply the bone with nutrients and with oxygen that it needs to live. And so this is a unit called osteon. These bone, their little tiny dots, are bone cells that are alive, most of them. Some of them have died, but are alive in the bone matrix. So that is an osteon. There's another way of looking at it. Here's an osteon around the blood vessels. You see the red arteries and the blue veins that are running through the compact bone. Here's the periosteum on the outside, and the spongy bone that would be full of red bone marrow inside of that. And you can see we've taken that from this little tiny piece here. You see the diaphysis with the yellow bone marrow and the epiphysis on each end that's full mostly of the spongy bone. And we're going to stop right there. We're going to continue the next time we talk with development of bones. How do they develop?